Okay, so I have this friend, and my friend has a little daughter, and when I was with them recently, the little daughter asked a question. She asked, why is it that there are so many expensive handbags in China? And, oh yeah, that seems like a good question, because when you walk around these shopping malls, you can find many luxury items that are quite expensive. So my friend said, Hendrik, maybe you should answer the question. And I thought about it. In China, the disposable income is around $350 a month in cities. In rural areas, it's a lot less. But many of these luxury items cost more than maybe $1,000. So how comes that there are so many, of these items available? Of course, there are many, people who are very rich and who can afford these items. But there are also people who are willing to save up, who have much lower incomes and who are saving up to purchase these items. So the answer I gave to this child was, well, the reason why there are so many, expensive handbags in China are because there are so many people who are willing to spend that much money on those handbags. And for this child, this was, a little difficult to compute, right? Because she's like 5, 6 years old, just in elementary school, and she starts to understand the concepts of money and value. So she doesn't understand why are these items so expensive. And also, in many Western countries, you will not find it that people save up, a lot of money to purchase items that are that expensive in relation to their income. So I started thinking on this question and what are the implications of this question, because in China this is something that is somewhat accepted, and for Chinese businesses it's something that they are used to. But when they go overseas, then often conditions are a little different. And these conditions have an impact on the success of these Chinese companies overseas. So today I'm going to talk on that. So let's start with this very simple model that I show here. It's a simplification. So that shows a society, and we assume that there's a high income group, then there's a middle class, and then there's a low income group. Now this is of course oversimplified. In reality, there's an overlap, and the groups are not of equal size as shown in this diagram, but just as a model. And what we can see happening in China is what I call vertical differentiation, and that means that people basically move across this vertical axis. Because of the economic growth of the country, people have managed to basically move from a lower income group to a higher income group. And this often happened over a very short period of time. So we can, for example, think of maybe the parent or the grandparent generation, and maybe they used to go to a local market to buy their groceries. So maybe this image kind of illustrates that. But then maybe the kids went through education and got a good job. So their lives changed. They live a very different life, and this life is portrayed in their purchase decisions. Many people in China will buy items to kind of to demonstrate their social status. They will make these purchase decisions because it will reflect on their status in society in a vertical manner. So because you have a higher income, because you have more money, you can make purchase decisions that will show that. So I refer to this as vertical differentiation. So people purchase things to show to what layer in society they belong to. Now if we go back to this model, same model, and we apply it to Western countries, we see something else happening. Also in many developed nations and in Western countries, of course you have different social groups. Again, same assumption, a low income group, a middle class, and a high income group. But because the conditions in many Western countries or in many developed nations are very different, it is not so easy for people to significantly move up in society in terms of the economic status. I can give you an example on that. In my home country, Germany, around 3/4 of all university students have at least one parent who also studied at university level. So that means if you come from a family with a strong educational background, you probably have your family has a higher income, and since you go to university, you are more likely to also have a high income. So you will basically stay in your social group. Now, the other way to penetrate kind of social classes obviously would be to start your own business. But also, in my home country, in Germany, only about 8 out of 1,000 people will go and start their own business. So also not so many entrepreneurs. In China, however, I think many people in China think about starting their own business, and many do it. So again, very big difference. So what does that mean for society? It means basically that something like vertical differentiation is difficult to achieve. People do not go and buy items to basically show a change in their social status, because there is no significant change. So something else happens instead, and this is what I refer to as horizontal differentiation. By that I mean that people who probably have very, very similar income levels, a similar economic status, will make different purchase decisions to differentiate themselves from peers that have a very similar economic status. So they're not trying to purchase items to show, well, I have moved up, I have a better life now, but they're just saying, maybe I'm into sports, so I purchase things that kind of show that I'm a sporty person, and maybe somebody else who has a very similar income, might display his personality in a very different way. But again, there is no kind of concentration around kind of an accepted social norm. And there's also not necessarily, it doesn't show that one of the two people has a higher or lower social status. So what are the implications for that if we assume that in Western countries something such as horizontal differentiation is more dominant, and in China vertical differentiation is more dominant? Now we understand that this affects society, that affects people, but we can have an example and look into what that means for businesses. So recently, earlier this year, a Chinese manufacturer announced that they produce the world's slimmest smartphone. So that's obviously a huge technical achievement, right? So now a Chinese mobile phone maker can make the slimmest device on earth. And obviously that's a difficult thing to achieve, because all the other makers also try to make slimmer devices. So it's something that's very difficult to achieve. Then you can also look at Sony. So Sony, they are now selling these waterproof mobile phones. So that is also something that is difficult to achieve, but at the same time, is it as difficult as building the slimmest device? Probably not. But what is more effective in the market? The one thinking, again, the Chinese company is thinking more in a vertical manner. We have to get better at something. We have to show that we can do this one thing even better than another company. Whereas Sony kind of thought more horizontal. They were thinking, maybe there are people who have very active lifestyles, who are outside a lot, or people who work outside, and they might value a waterproof device a lot more than any other feature. So they developed a feature that probably many, many companies here in China, waterproof devices can build. But they haven't thought of it really yet. They haven't thought of it, this is something different that other, maybe mobile phone makers do not offer. But if we do offer it, it makes us different kind of, on a horizontal basis. We can kind of target these other, social groups, these other niche markets or segments in society of people who are really into this kind of thing. So again, and this is difficult, right? Because it means, if you talk to your boss and you say, like, we should develop a feature that other, companies probably don't include, then in China this would be perceived as a risk. And there are social and historical reasons for that. And one example would be the test system in Chinese education. There's always the one best answer, right? We all kind of try to thrive to this kind of norm, the social norm. And horizontal differentiation assumes that you're trying to do something differently from the others, and by that you're trying to outperform the market. And the example I had just given was about consumer markets, but I can also give an example from B2B markets. In a previous role, I worked in automotive as a consultant, and we were hired by a car company from Southeast Asia. And that car company hired us to reduce purchasing costs, and in particular by finding suppliers from China. And right now, there are actually many, many good car part suppliers in China, and not only joint ventures, but also Chinese companies. And when we reached out to these, potential suppliers for a range of parts, those superior Chinese suppliers, they would basically say, look, we can easily supply parts to this car maker from Southeast Asia because we are also suppliers to North American brands, to Japanese brands, to European brands. So, meeting the technology needs of this car company from Southeast Asia that has far less complex technology is no problem for us. So they again were thinking in kind of in a vertical pattern. Like there is the high quality, the advanced, and then there's another potential client that has like a lower technology. But the reality is kind of different because for many Western car makers, building cars is about fuel economy, so they need light parts, etc. But for our client from Southeast Asia, it was more like in that country there were some specific conditions. Most importantly, the fuel at different gas stations had kind of inconsistent quality. So it's not like in Europe or the US where you have the same exact fuel quality at every gas station no matter where you go. In that country the fuel quality was kind of slightly different, a little diluted. And that's a problem that also in China sometimes occurs. So what you need is engines that have higher tolerance level. So you don't need a supplier that can give you the lightest or the best part. You need a supplier that understands your needs in the market. And if that specific need is, the fuel quality is inconsistent, then this is like a horizontal problem. It's not that one is high quality, one is low quality. They have different needs, but basically at the same level. However, the Chinese suppliers that we contacted, they didn't really understand that. They were just thinking, well, if we walk in there and we say we work with all these great companies, it's going to be easy for us to kind of scoop up this business from that lower technology company. In the end, they got almost none of the business because they didn't really demonstrate that they understand the needs of this specific market. And this is horizontal differentiation. A market is not just adding more features to your product or making it better in some area where other companies are already really good at. It's about finding something that is relevant for specific groups in the market and that makes your product or your service really different from other competing options available in the market, because only then can you win in the market. So this is something that I find is very important for Chinese companies when they go overseas. It's not just enough to say, look, we do this too and we can do it maybe for less money or we are almost as good as that company. It's important to see the bigger picture and to understand who are the players in the market and to be brave enough to say, look, we do something differently, but this makes us unique. And this is why we can sell to this market, and this is why we can be successful in overseas markets. So I believe that in order for Chinese companies to achieve this goal, it's very important that they understand this concept of horizontal differentiation. And because the Chinese society is in this particular context so different from many Western developed countries, it's something that that I hope that through the speech that people can maybe get an idea of. And then if you start thinking about it, maybe you can see how that may affect the company that you work for or that you work with. Thank you.